Hey everyone, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We're just getting started here. Going to do some intros here in a minute as we've got all of our registrants just hopping into the room. Excited to share this topic with everyone. It's a new topic in terms of our webinar series, really moving into some more sophisticated topics here for marketers who have covered the basics and are really looking at where to go next in their marketing campaigns. So my name is Lauren. I'm the SVP of Healthcare Marketing here at Cardinal. I've had the pleasure of working with our guest, Rich, today for going on 8 years. Learn something new from him every day in every conversation. So I'm really excited for you guys to get to hear directly from him. Rich is the SVP of Performance Marketing here at Cardinal. And just in the past 2 years has really built and grown our conversion rate optimization program as an agency. So Rich is going to talk us through a number of topics today. I want to start with, building a user experience foundation. Why is that important and what are the fundamentals of doing so? And then we can talk a little bit about, should you consider CRO? Is it right for your organization at this stage in your growth cycle and in your marketing cycle? Who is CRO really for? And then we're going to talk about the process itself and then actually do an audit on a couple of participants. Thank you so much to Evolution Wellness and to Premier Family Physicians for volunteering to be part of our program today. So woven throughout this presentation, you're going to see us comment on real user experiences from real healthcare companies. And we really appreciate them being willing to kind of put it out on the table and get some honest feedback from us on the spot. So, and then at the very end, we will have a Q&A section, but I don't want you to wait till the end to throw your questions into the chat. So the chat is open. You can get in there and start asking questions whenever you want. Throughout the presentation, I will jump in and ask questions at various points, address those. We'll put them out to Rich and let him give you some feedback. And we like to have fun with Q&A. So if you do ask a question and get called out as part of our presentation, our marketing coordinator, Kat, will send out some gift cards and some t-shirts. So please participate. We want you guys to be part of this. So Rich, without further ado, let's start with, the first steps to user experience before CRO is even a consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lauren, thank you for the intro and thanks to everybody for joining us here for 60 minutes and taking time out of their busy days. I know we've got some familiar faces and some new faces as well. So hopefully you guys find this useful and interesting and it'll spark some ideas to take into your own kind of UX and CRO optimizations for your companies. So yeah, I think user experience is a term that gets banded around a lot, and it's a very sort of all-encompassing term. Really, it's about how a user feels when they're experiencing with your product or your service. And in this case, when we're talking about product or service, we're really talking about your website or your landing pages. And so really what CRO is sort of the testing component of user experience, and it's a mechanism to perfect your user experience and increase your conversion rate. But there's not really a massive value in starting to do a lot of testing when your user experience is flawed. So essentially testing your original user experience against a slightly modified variant of your user experience if that user experience isn't at least getting the basics right. So what you want to start when you're thinking about going into CRO is you want to start by looking at your existing user experience and making sure that you're at least adhering to best practices. And a way to try and understand if you are providing your user with what they need is by a simple way is to look at this model here, which is called the FOG behavioral model. And essentially what the FOG behavioral model illustrates is that a user that is highly motivated and is given something that they have the ability to do, something that is relatively easy for them, will take the desired action that you want them to take. If you are unable to motivate them, and if you ask them to do something hard, and you're asking them in that moment, you're going to fail in getting them to take the action that you want. So it's pretty self-explanatory, right? But people who are very motivated and think to do things that are very easy will do those things more often than not. And so that's what you've got to look through the lens of to make sure that your user experience is delivering against those two things.
And Rich, when you think about user experience, talk about what those could be, right? Is it your homepage on desktop? Is it landing pages? Is it mobile? Is it everything? Just kind of define that for everybody.
Yeah, it's everything, right? So an example of something that of high motivation in terms of a user experience would be understanding what your users care about the most, and then making sure that you're hitting on what motivates them, right? So if there's a healthcare, if you sell a healthcare product and what the users really care about is the outcome and the life that it's going to help them lead, make sure that you're leading with the outcome, because that is what's going to motivate them, right? Don't give them a bunch of technical jargon about the product or how much it costs if that's not what really is driving them to make that decision, right? If ultimately they're just trying to understand how that's going to improve their standard of living. From an ability point of view, it's make your site easy to use. Make sure that it's functional, that information is easy to access, that the CTAs are clear and that they follow you through the page so that you're not having to scroll 20 scrolls on your mobile device to try and find that call button to actually call someone. So there's a lot of different things that go into user experience, both from design, functionality, content on the page, how it renders on various devices. It really encompasses all of that.
Awesome. Thank you.
But in terms of creating, a simple UX, something that's easy for users to essentially have that high ability and to be highly motivated, you've got to go back to how people think. And people have two distinct modes of thinking. There's the fast and intuitive mode, which is sometimes known as thin slicing, and that's a human's preferred state, right? So when you think about first impressions, when you meet someone, you get that initial gut reaction, you make a quick judgment. That's how humans like to think, especially in today's age where you're being bombarded with so many signals and so many things. I want to be able to swipe right and see, do I like that thing? Yes, I do. Excellent. I've made my decision. The other mode of thinking is slow and analytical. And this is where you're really forcing a user to think and have to disseminate information in order to understand whether they're making the right decision. And users don't like that, right? So if you're making a user work to understand if your product or service is what they need, that's an immediate turnoff. So something that you want to think about with your user experience is, if I know that my user needs to understand 3 things to take the desired action that I want them to take, I need to present that information to them as quickly and as easily as possible.
And Rich, I have a question. It came from John in the chat, and it's kind of the perfect segue. And I know you're going to talk about this in more detail when we get to the audits, but you talk about, when we understand what the client wants, then we present those things in a certain way. How do you know what the client wants, right? Do you have any tips on even just understanding that as a foundational item?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get to it, but really, especially in CRO and also in user experience, research is the most critical component of the process. So a lot of people think, it's having a pretty design, or it's the number of tests that you run, or the number of tests that you deploy, and those things are important. But it's about the research that you do on your users and that shift to user-centric marketing. And understanding your user can be done in a number of different ways. We utilize surveys of both existing customers, past customers, but also we'll run survey tools just out to the market. So for instance, Pollfish and Google surveys. If you're a client like a dentist, where you have a wide audience base and where most people could fit into your audience, those are valuable tools to set up surveys and really ask your users what they care about most. And I think we have a slide in this deck from Pollfish that shows an example of that. And then you can do user testing. If you have time, it's a great thing to do is to actually bring in some of your existing users and show them the website, show them the mobile site, the mobile app if you're developing an app, There's also professional sites and services where you can hire professional user testers to also essentially vet your experience and make sure that the things that you want to convey are being conveyed effectively to your audience.
And Rich, something like that can be done by an agency like Cardinal, for example. You could also, if you have a much larger scale research need, you could use a true research company, right? There's a lot of ways you can do it. And some of the tools that you mentioned are quite user friendly. If you have a marketing department large enough with some capacity, you could even run it yourself, right? There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's relatively cheap to do. Obviously, if you've got a wide enough group of your own customer base, you can use a tool like SurveyMonkey to survey them for free. But if you want to use something like Pollfish and Google surveys to go outside of your existing user base, you're probably looking at around $2 to $3 for a respondent. And most surveys need 400 respondents to be considered statistically significant. So you're looking at an investment there of around $1,000 to $1,200.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Kat, I know you're listening in. If you don't mind sending John a little gift for participating, that would be great. All right, Rich, let's move on to the next.
Yeah, so I want to provide an example of what poor user experience is. And this example in particular is actually borrowed from CXL, which is an institute that specializes in conversion rate optimization, but it's a great illustration of poor UX. So I thought I'd share it here with you guys today. So here's an ad. You're browsing around the internet and you see an ad, and it talks about marketing automation and mobile marketing automation. And as marketers, we're always looking at automation, and we know that mobile's the future. So it's like, okay, great. I'm interested in this. I want to understand how this marketing automation platform is going to solve my issue. So I click on the ad, and I want to see a live demo, and it's pretty clear what that CTA is. And then I go to this experience.
Sorry, Rich.
Clicking on my slide master here.
My arrow didn't work. I have to use the next button. User experience within this platform.
Yeah. So, yes, like I said, I'm really interested in seeing my live demo of this mobile marketing automation platform. So I click the ad, and then I get through to the landing page, and all of a sudden, I'm just overwhelmed, right? And Lauren, if you click on the next slide,
yep.
There are 107 different options for me to take on this page. And the worst part about it is you can see here that there is something that says see a live demo, but it's not anything that's driven with visual hierarchy, right? There's a picture of a laptop underneath it. It's just in kind of plain text with an arrow next to it. There's these green boxes underneath that are actually drawing my eye much more, but none of these three are the options that I saw in the ad. Then there's the chat with us section here to the right that's very distracting. And so as a user at this point, I'm incredibly overwhelmed, and my ability to make the right decision is significantly low because I'm having to hunt around. I don't understand why there are all these other options. There's nothing on the page that's actually talking about the product because it's just a ton of links out to other things for me to go to. So at this point, I'm completely lost, and there's nothing that was in the ad that actually appealed to me that is reiterated on the page. And you guys might think, well, this is one of those crazy examples that's just been pulled up to demonstrate an extreme example in a webinar. But it's easier said than done, especially with home pages, to have a level of clutter that's really going to impact the ability of the user to take the desired action that you want it to take. And Lauren, I think if you go to the next slide here, this is actually an example from one of the companies that submitted to us for a UX audit. And you can see here that the red dots on this homepage are links that the user could take to various other pages on the site. And there's been a lot of kind of studies done, psychological studies done about what is the optimal number of choices for a user. And we tend to go too narrow, where we think as marketers, well, we can only give a user one choice, right? Because if we want the users to do the one thing that we want them to do, the easiest way to do that is to just give them that choice. And actually, studies have found that that's not accurate. Users want to have at least some choice, but that the optimal number is between 5 options and 7 options, right? That's the optimal number of choices that you could give a user. So here, when you look at this page, you can see that there is a lot more than 7 options. And with every option that is added, the user becomes more confused and, is unable to make that decision to the pathway that they want to take. And so these are the things that when we're thinking about user experience, we need to be looking at, right? And say, okay, if we're driving traffic to this page, we need to make sure that this page is specific to what we were driving the traffic there from. So if I'm looking for a PCP appointment, then the page should be simplified to focus on booking an appointment with a primary care physician. The visual hierarchy here should be a lot stronger around the book an appointment button. It should have a contrast color. It should stand out against the blue. We should be pushing some of these other links much further down the page, so that I may be interested in engaging with them, but the hierarchy of the page has them further down so they're not distracting me if I truly am just looking to book an appointment. So it's little things like this that we can do that you may be falling into these traps without even realizing it, and it's pretty simple structural work that can be done to help simplify these pages and make them more effective and make it easier for your user to take those actions that you really want them to take.
And Rich, for the people sitting on this call that think, well, I offer 10 services or have all these locations, how can I possibly narrow it down? They're all equally important. The homepage represents a catch-all for what your business has to offer. Your recommendation would then be what? To focus on optimizing service-specific pages where other entry points into the site, right? Besides just the homepage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and also to test. We do a lot of homepage testing on CRO, right? So typically, you'll have some idea of what is most important to your business, what is most important to the bottom line, right? And so, for instance, if you're a health system, maybe your 2 main entry points are PCP and ortho. And so you want to focus in on those 2 service lines. And so you have a hierarchy that while you talk about other pieces, your hierarchy leans into those 2 service lines because the majority of your users are going to come to the homepage and want to take action against those 2 service lines. So you can still provide the pertinent information to all your other users and still be an effective catch-all, but it's just making sure that your informational hierarchy and your visual hierarchy are set up in such a way where you're leaning into the things that are most important to drive the bottom line of your business.
Perfect. So we had a question, and I think this is going to, address it. So let me call out Sandy's question in the chat real quick, which is there an easy way to even understand the starting point for user experience, right? How do you create that benchmark? I know you're going to talk about some best practices here, which I think becomes the starting point, and then we'll talk about measurement. But anything you have to add to that, Rich?
Yeah, I mean, there's in terms of evaluating your own user experience, there's a number of different things that you can do, right? There's quantitative analytics. So you can take a look in Google, as long as you guys have got Google Analytics set up, you can take a look in Google Analytics and understand how well your site's performing, how effective it is at driving visitors and turning them into conversions, how much time people are spending on certain pages, what they're doing on those pages, what the bounce rate is. All of these metrics will kind of give you a quantitative overview of how effective the site is. From there, something else that you're going to want to do is a heuristic walkthrough. And a heuristic walkthrough is essentially, and we're going to do one here with Evolution Wellness at the end of this presentation, but it's where you're looking to see if we're adhering to user experience best practices. And there's a certain set of rules, and this might not be something that you can do yourself if you're not that au fait with user experience, you may have to bring in someone, a consultant, an agency, to do this heuristic walkthrough with you. But that's another qualitative mechanism in order to understand how effective your UX is. And then there's things like mouse analytics, like mouse flow, Hotjar, where you're essentially looking at heat maps, you're looking at user recordings, and you can even deploy polls and surveys through those tools to understand if your user is finding the information that they need. So you could have, through those tools, you can have a very simple poll on the bottom that they can click, and it opens kind of like a live chat, and you can ask them a simple question. Did you find what you were looking for on this page? Was this page effective at helping you get what you needed? And although not that many people will engage with that, over time, you'll start to get some semblance of answers from your users about whether or not that was effective. There's other tools as well that you can test your user experience through. There's a platform called Usability Hub where you can run different tests to essentially evaluate your user experience. So there's a lot of different things out there. I think you would probably want to speak to a UX expert or at least a consultant or a contractor, if not an agency, to try and help get set on the right path.
Perfect. And I know you have some examples here of a good place to start. So that's, like you said, just some things that they can start to think about if they're wondering if their UX is a good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. So we can touch on these. So ultimately, again, we talk about ability. So a good user experience shortens the journey from click to conversion, right? So remove any unnecessary steps, remove any unnecessary distraction, right? You want to make that UX as simple as possible for your end user. And again, that's whether that's having a button that stands out, whether it's having a sticky CTA that sticks to the bottom of the screen on mobile, whether it makes sure that you've got the most pertinent information up top and you're super succinct and it's scannable. All of those things are going to help your user get to that conversion faster. Another one that's really important, which I think is a mistake that you see a lot, especially if you're driving traffic to like a homepage, as we showed in that prior example, is you've got to follow up on the promises that are made in your ad. And so what we see with a lot of customers right now is they're doing endless tinkering on the ads. So they're pre-click optimization. They're trying hundreds of different ads in market, different promotions, different value props, different motivational statements. And then they're driving all that traffic to exactly the same experience. And so if you're doing that, it's impossible to follow up on the promises that you're making in the ad, because you may have 50 or 100 different promises out there and the same experience for all of those folks. So where possible, if you are going to tout a certain promotion in an ad or a certain value prop, you want to make sure that in the hero, or at least in a dominant position on the page, you are reiterating that promise to the user so that they feel like they're in the right place. And then, again, super important to understand the user and what are they motivated by? What is the friction and the hurdles that are going to prevent them from taking action? So, if there's if you're advertising a certain procedure, but there is a perception by your user that procedure is dangerous, one of the things that you are going to want to do is you're going to want to combat that straight away on your page in your experience to remove that barrier, and ideally try and provide some kind of empirical evidence that shows that it is not dangerous. Have some testimonials of prior patients that have been through the procedure and have had a seamless experience. Anything that you can do to essentially eliminate those barriers and those hurdles. So it's super important to understand the user, what motivates them, what holds them back, and what they're looking to try and do. And then ultimately, what the user is looking for when they click through to a website or a landing page is clarity. So don't be ambiguous in any of your statements. Make sure that you are being very, very clear about what it is you have to offer. Make sure that your imagery is clear and that it resonates with what you do. Things that often get missed, like expectation managers. So when someone fills in a form, tell them when they fill above that form exactly who they're going to end up speaking to, when they're going to contact, when you're going to contact them. So if it's a callback, our triage nurse will be in touch with you within 4 hours, right? So they know exactly who's going to call them and when they're going to be called. That's really important to a user when they're giving up their personal information. And then I think this goes back into that top point, but create a really clear path to the conversion goal. Make it very easy to drive them to that action that you want them to take, and don't convolute it, and don't push them into too much information. Don't force them to go find what you want them to do.
Awesome. We had a question while you were talking, actually at the very beginning of this slide, Rich. What are the biggest issues people make in their digital experience? And I think in going through these best practices, you just spoke about what not to do as well. So Amanda, hopefully your question got asked in that last segment. And if you feel like it didn't, feel free to chime back in and we can clarify on that further.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to provide clarity there. So yeah, I do want to talk about design though, because it is important. And we talk about the user and the user's motivation and ability and simplicity, but there's also sort of visual credibility, and design is really important. Now, visual brains process information 50 times faster. So it's not only important to have a pretty website, but one that has a good visual hierarchy where a user can quickly disseminate, even just by looking at the picture, what this website is about. And so, we tend to see websites that use pretty ambiguous stock footage that could be about anything, lifestyle imagery that could be about anything. And you're sort of doing yourself a disservice by doing that, right? Because ultimately, a user is trying to understand what the website is about by the images that they see on that site before they've even read the copy. So you should use images to provide that clarity. And then, one thing I will just say on design as well real quick is that there's been studies that prove that essentially, even though it shouldn't matter, a good looking website, users are much more likely to engage with a company that has a good looking, professionally designed website than a poorly designed website. So it's really important to think about that when you're considering your user experience. Does the website look good? Does it look modern? Does it look up to date? Is it clean, etc.? Because that's going to play into the back of your user's mind. Another thing just to talk about with user experience that's important is there's a lot of neuroscience that underpins user experience and an effective user experience. And essentially, what you want to do is you want to encourage dopamine, which is people's reward mechanism. So think about surprise and delight. That goes back to that statement about reinforcing your promises that you're making in your ad. You really want to surprise them because if you do so, that will release dopamine, and dopamine motivates them to take action. Conversely, what you need to avoid is triggering cortisol. So that is your stress hormone. And so, if I go to a website and it says sign up for a free trial, and then when I go to sign up for the free trial, I have to put my credit card information in. That triggers cortisol, because I'm like, hang on a minute, I thought I was getting a free trial here. Now you're asking for my credit card information. I'm not ready to give you my credit card information yet. I'm just looking at this product. I just want to see what it does. So that will prevent cortisol. Again, similar to listing a price in your ad and then not showing pricing on your website. Those kind of things will produce cortisol, and that's going to make me stressed. And then that prevents me from taking action because I'm in a state of stress and I'm going to leave the site. So recapping on that, in terms of UX best practice, some UX best practices here. Social proof early and often, right? I think particularly in the medical field, talk about your patients' experiences. Talk about how your customers have found working with you. Social proof and testimonials are also a great place to understand your user, right? I cannot stress that enough. Go through and read your users' testimonials about you. Go to Google, read their testimonials, Trustpilot, any solution that you use like that, and mine that data to understand why they loved working with you or why they didn't, right? And then that will help you. That will help inform your user experience, what information you need to convey to future prospects, to get them to take the action that you want, and to reassure them and help them overcome their hurdles. Another thing that we've really started doing over the last year, and this goes back to that comment about the same experience, how the same experience for everyone is flawed, is some of you guys may have company services that are high consideration, right? And so your users will be doing a lot of research, and they will go through different phases of the funnel, of the patient journey, and they shouldn't get the same experience regardless of where they're at. They should get an experience that is much more tailored for them. So if I am in the exploratory phase, I should be getting the top of the funnel experience where I'm seeing informational content. Maybe I get to download an ebook, guide. It's a very soft conversion action that I'm being asked to take. Versus when I'm at the bottom of the funnel, I should be seeing a very short page that is very action-oriented, very transactional. What can I do to get you in the car today? Creating a sense of urgency, because I already understand the service. I already understand why you're the best option, and how you differentiate from your competitive set. So now I just need that extra nudge to take me over the line. So I would encourage the folks on this call, if you have a high consideration purchase that happens over weeks or months, to consider breaking up your experiences by funnel stage. Another very simple one is these motivational CTAs. You see that all the time with the phone number button, where it's just got the number written on, and you've got the phone number icon. It's just a basic example, and it's like, your user's smart. They know if there's a button with a phone icon on it, that it's a call button, right? So use that text instead of displaying the number to motivate them to click on it, right? Tell them who they're going to be speaking to. Tell them why they would call you in that button text. So there's just tiny little changes like that can really improve your UX. I'm not going to go through all of these because I know we're short on time, but I hope that was helpful on user experience.
Yeah, and Rich, this is going to go out to all the registrants, so they'll get a chance to read this in more detail. Let's touch on the fundamentals quickly. I want to make sure, we've got about 10 minutes before I want to get into the live audit. So we'll touch on some of this. We had a question which you may address at some point in this, Rich. So if you do, let me know. Craig asked a question, and I'm gonna tweak Craig's question a little bit. He asked, "Can you talk about what you need to make sure you have for SEO?" Right? And let me convert that a little bit for this conversation and say, how do you balance CRO with SEO? Right? SEO is traditionally known for longer form content, internal linking, just different fundamentals than perhaps conversion, right? They seem to be these two conflicting ideas. What tips, if any, do you have for how to kind of get the best of both worlds?
Yeah, so I would say, first and foremost, if you are running paid media, that you have a separate set of landing pages, or if you're a multi-local business, location pages that are non-indexed, where you can run any kind of CRO test, UX, best practices on them to your heart's content without having to worry about any negative SEO impacts. So that would be the first thing that I would do if I was running media. In terms of your actual pages, where you're running CRO, but you have an SEO component that you have to be mindful of, it's important that you engage with whoever is essentially running your SEO. So if it's an agency or if it's an internal resource, it's important that your UX and CRO folks are in cahoots essentially, and that they're running all of their tests by your SEO folks to make sure that there'll be no negative impact on SEO, and so that any of those kind of content factors, very descriptive H1s and things like that, are not being negatively impacted by CRO tests that are being ran. I will say though that there's also some balance that you have to strike. We ran a couple of CRO tests for LifeStance, which is a behavioral health client of ours, which did have a slight impact on their SEO rankings, because we were essentially doing some redirects, which had somewhat of a negative impact on their rankings, but their conversion rate increased to such an extent that it outweighed the traffic that was lost by essentially personalizing the experience and introducing these redirects. Now, we saw that it had a negative SEO impact, and then we went back and we readjusted the way that we were creating those experiences so that it wouldn't. But sometimes it is actually, you just have to weigh up what's going to deliver the biggest yield. Is it going to be a better user experience, or is it going to be slightly higher rankings? But I would say, if there's a concern, work with your SEO team to make sure that you guys are aligned on what tests you can execute.
So bringing in slightly less traffic, but converting that traffic at a higher rate should ultimately yield the better result than just traffic alone, right? Traffic that doesn't convert does nothing for the business.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I think we lost sort of like 5% of our organic traffic on that test, but we increased our conversion rate across the board on all traffic by 30%. So it was a massive increase in conversions.
Awesome. I like to hear that. All right. Fundamentals of CRO, about 5 minutes to talk through this, and then we'll jump into the audit. Yeah.
So you've got your good UX now. You've gone through, you've got everything where you want it to be, and now you're ready for CRO. And what CRO is, it's systematic improvement of conversion rates on key pages in order to increase conversion volume or lower your CPA, and actually can also help increase your lead to sale ratio by improving the quality of your leads. And so it's really the testing component, right? A/B, and we'll get into this, but think about like A/B testing, multivariate testing, personalization. That's what CRO is. And really why you should diversify into CRO is, the performance improvements available through CRO can substantially outweigh sort of the pre-click optimizations that you can make. And I think we just talked about it there with that SEO example of, you could work for 3 years to try and gain the amount of organic traffic that it would have taken to drive those conversions without CRO that we were able to do in one test on the CRO side. So the yield can be huge, and especially from a cost benefit perspective, companies don't tend to spend a huge amount of their budget on CRO. Usually around 5% of their marketing budget goes to CRO. But a sustained CRO offering, just like SEO is such good value for money, it can increase your conversion rates from 200 to 500% over many years. So the yield is huge.
And Rich, I see you mentioned here, specifically important for mature campaigns, whether that's search, organic, whatever it is that you're doing, when you feel like, you're tinkering for, an incremental cent here or there on your cost per clicks, or, you're trying to get a keyword from position 3 to 2, right? Something like this could be a much better use of your time and energy than that small tinker that you're trying to do in a specific campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if you're spending significant amounts on media, you're probably going to find that your most expensive media, your most inefficient media has a very high CPA, and you can take that money out and spend it on CRO and almost lose nothing in terms of lead volume by redirecting those funds. So is this just a fancy way of saying landing pages? Absolutely not. CRO, as I mentioned before, you can do it on the homepage, you can do it on pillar pages. You can also obviously do testing on landing pages, but it's really about the systematic testing of user experience on any page that receives traffic in order to determine what the optimal user experience should be in order to drive a specific conversion action. And I mentioned this already, but essentially any page that has decent traffic volume can be tested. So the core ones are going to be things like location pages, landing pages, homepage, obviously, but then your core service pages also, and even blog pages. I've touched on this already, but another thing that CRO can be utilized for, and it sits outside of the testing function somewhat, is personalization. And obviously, creating one-to-one experiences and personalization has been a buzzword right now, in marketing for a while now. But we spend so much time letting algorithms try and create the perfect ad for us in the pre-click environment, doing all this ad testing, but then you get the same generic experience. So utilizing personalization to create one-to-one messaging by serving, the same image that the user saw on an ad, or the same hero headline that the user clicked through on an ad, or even inserting the same keyword that a user saw in an ad or that a user searched, really helps to increase conversion rates. And it's something that can be deployed relatively seamlessly without you having to create thousands of different page variants. You can have one page, and then you have programmatic personalization that runs on top of that creates these unique experiences that are more relevant for your end user. And so it's definitely a worthwhile thing doing, because if you're spending all this effort over here and then just sending them to that generic experience, you're not really going to reap the benefit of all the pre-click work that you're doing.
And Rich, one of the best examples of this that we've seen is multi-location practices, tens, hundreds of practices. And rather than sending to something like a generic location finder and putting the burden on the patient to then figure out where they need to go, is really understanding where they are geographically and serving them the most relevant location within your practice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great.
So that's a big one. Touch on who CRO is for before we dive into this audit.
Sure. CRO can really be for anyone. Especially if you're considering doing it yourself. Google Optimize is a fantastic free testing tool that you can deploy, and as long as you've got patience, you could have low volume to your traffic to your site, low volume traffic to your site, and you can still do some testing. You've just got to be patient, and getting to statistical significance will take a while. But people who should consider a sort of a CRO retainer with an agency, it's folks who have more than 10,000 sessions a month to landing pages or to web pages that can be optimized for conversions. And essentially, especially if they have low conversion rates or lower than average conversion rates for their industry and an objectively poor user experience, right? So maybe you've done a lot of work in SEO, you're getting a lot of traffic, maybe you spend a lot of money in media and you're driving a lot of traffic, but you're just not converting it at a decent rate. I think average conversion rates across all industries is something in the region of 2.5%. So maybe if you've got a conversion rate of 1% and your industry is 4%, then you have a conversion problem. And at that point, you should be looking for conversion rate optimization as a solution. I think another kind of benchmark that we throw out there when we're vetting our prospects and clients on CRO is if you're spending $75,000 a month or more on media, generally at that rate, unless you have a massive amount of search demand and unless everything is absolutely brilliantly optimized, you're going to start to see some wastage there. You're going to start to see some ad spend that really isn't yielding a ton. Could be some expensive non-brand terms, could be some social traffic that's not really, some social audiences that aren't performing that well. And usually there's a little bit of wiggle room to take that money and reinvest it into CRO and see better performance across the account. This kind of segues into that, right? So high spending programs are fertile ground. Like I said, they usually have some non-converting spend. I'm sure, if you were spending $200,000 in Google ads, you could probably look in there and find $6,000 to $7,000, $8,000 a month that drove zero conversions. That's not to say there's no value to that traffic, but you could probably take it and use it for CRO and yield more results. And you also tend to be more sophisticated and have more tactics. You also tend to have landing pages. So there's more flexibility and fluidity there from a CRO point of view. I think
you got this one. Yeah. Thanks to Craig for helping us get this one out there. So yeah, this one's covered. I'll let you touch on this one, Rich. Sarah asked, should CRO be run in tandem with a website design, right? Like when you think about CRO, does it mean you're heading towards a website design? Do you need to redesign your website first and then do CRO? Like what's the appropriate order of operations?
There's not an easy answer to that, right? It's going to depend on essentially how good your user experience is now and whether or not that's worth testing. It's also going to depend on whether or not you want to use CRO testing to inform a web redesign, right? So I think we've all been through web redesigns, and we know how subjective they can be and how stressful they can be in terms of opinions and stakeholders in the room. And CRO testing can be a great way of creating data-driven opportunities to test these theories that people have at going into a website redesign, right? So if someone's like, well, I actually really think that this content's more important than this content, and so on the new site, we should have this content up front and then this content below, or this imagery works better than this imagery, you can run some CRO tests to actually determine if that's the case before you pay a design agency to go through all the hassle of putting together a new website, only to find out later on down the road that it's actually ineffective at converting your prospects into patients or users.
Awesome. And then talk about mobile here real quick, and then we'll move on to the audit.
Yeah, mobile amazingly is still kind of the redheaded stepchild of user experience, and I can say that because I have red hair. But it's sort of the last bastion. It's the thing that people forget about. They're like, well, I need to have a website on mobile, but most designers are still optimizing to desktop. And so what we tend to find in the CRO world is that the mobile user experience, even though you have the most traffic on your mobile UX, is the worst. It's the poorest performing. So we tend to look at both CRO and at web design at Cardinal through a mobile first lens, especially obviously if you've got more mobile traffic than you have desktop traffic. So it's definitely an afterthought. Mobile experiences tend to be slower, which is very important for both your SEO rankings, but also for your user experience. And they also, when you squash desktop content onto mobile in a responsive website, it also can make that user experience very difficult, because what didn't look like an absurd amount of text on a desktop all of a sudden looks like a massive amount of text on mobile. You're having to scroll 20 screens down to get to the pertinent information and find out what to do. So I would definitely encourage you guys to go and look at your mobile UX and really evaluate that as the primary UX concern that your business has, because more than likely 60% plus of your traffic is going to be going to mobile devices.
Perfect. So let's skip the process, Rich. As you go through the discussion in the audit, kind of weave in what the process is. I think we'll be able to touch on both within the same conversation. So apologies to everyone. We're going to skip the process a little bit, and I want to really allow you to see this in action.
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, this is going to get sent out, so everyone will have the ability to kind of look at a list of what some of the text, the tech stack that we like to use, what you should expect in terms of timelines and everything is covered in that process section. So let's take a look at Evolution Wellness. And like I said, feel free to touch on process as you weave throughout this. We've got about 13 minutes left, and our QA has really been woven throughout this conversation. So we likely won't do a true QA at the end. So get your questions in the next 13 minutes while Rich is talking, and we'll bring them up as we go.
Yeah, so this is a heuristic. This is what we're going to perform right now is what I call a heuristic walkthrough, heuristic analysis. If it's just looking and making sure that this site is adhering to best practices from a visual point of view and a structural point of view. If you were going to do a real audit of your site, you would then layer in all these other elements that we talked about, like looking at your analytics, looking at your heat maps, looking at user recordings, maybe running polls, maybe doing some user testing. So I don't want you guys to think that this is all encompassing, this audit. This is just one piece of a 6-strand research process that we skipped over, but that you'll see in this deck when it gets sent out. So thanks to Evolution Wellness here for letting us pick this apart a little bit. And we reviewed their homepage, and we reviewed their contact page with the form submission. And as I mentioned before, we're looking at this through a mobile first lens, so we can jump right in. So again, and I think I've touched on this, but really the first thing that you need to do before you're doing this walkthrough is you've got to understand the user. What is the user trying to do? And the reason why I bring this slide up is Embark Wellness is behavioral health. We have some behavioral health clients, and we ran a survey because we like to understand our customers' end users. So we will run surveys when we have a number of clients in a specific segment, and we ran a behavioral health provider survey. And one thing that came back in this survey was the importance of insurance coverage and affordability. Like that is the most important thing to the users when they're looking at behavioral health. The second thing is finding out if a specific service is offered, getting information on hours and locations, and reading reviews. So there's, it's really important to look at the user experience through the lens of what the user is trying to accomplish. So if we want to skip over, you'll see how that ties back. So hero section, most important section of your site, of your page, right? It's where you get all the viewability. Oftentimes you'll see viewability drop by 30, 40, 50% below the fold. So you've really got to get this section right. And so some of our observations here on doing a heuristic walkthrough is the banner actually obscures the logo. So again, that kind of confuses the user because they're like, am I on the right site? I can't see the Evolution Wellness banner. I think I'm in the right place, but I'm not sure. But you're kind of sowing the seeds of doubt automatically there by having that branding be obscured. The other thing that the banner does is it's from a visual hierarchy point of view, it draws your eye immediately to it. And so even though the main thing that this page is trying to get you to do, which is to call or schedule a consultation, the banner is detracting away from that and is actually overlapping on those two buttons below, making it harder for the user to click on mobile. So it's drawing me away from the most important thing that I want my end user to complete here. Another thing, again, we talked about this with imagery and also with providing clarity, is there's little clarity provided in the hero. So I know that I'm going to do small changes will get me big results, but I'm not sure how. I'm not sure what those things entail. There's just very little clarity here. And again, if you think about 20 to 30% of my traffic may never see anything but this, you really want to provide some level of clarity in this window of exactly how Evolution Wellness is going to help me see big changes or get big results with small changes. Another thing, you've got the repetition of the main CTA, and that again is obscured by this Wilmington NC banner here. So again, from an ability point of view, it just makes it a little bit more difficult for me as a user to take action. And the main CTA is very transactional, and this is the homepage. So this is going to be the main entry point for first-time users, and it's asking me to do something very transactional very early. And that might not be the right experience. We know, again, we need to motivate our users before we can ask them for something, right? So got to think about, is it the right time to ask them to call and schedule an appointment, or do we want them to just learn more as the main CTA in that hero section? Another thing that happened when I was on the hero section here is I got this pop-up, and it was almost immediate. And again, if I'm trying to book an appointment, or if I'm trying to find out more about Evolution Wellness, what this pop-up is doing, even though it might be useful content for me, is it's distracting me away from my main purpose, because it's unlikely that I was looking for a free anxiety e-course. The other thing that is a challenge for me so early on is there's no explainer on what else my email address will be used for. If I have privacy concerns, there's nothing in there that really explains what's going to happen to my personal information once I submit it to Evolution Wellness. And so again, that's going to cause me to take pause, and again, distracting me away from what I'm ultimately trying to do.
And Rich, you may have this in your outcomes, but some better uses for pop-ups when people click to exit the site as kind of a last attempt to engage with them, or a time delay, perhaps, to give them the ability to first understand the business. So maybe it's 5 or 10 seconds into the experience that you then provide that information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think exit intent pop-ups are the ones that make the most sense, especially, but again, I would encourage you guys to test that experience, right? Certainly test the pop-up, but I wouldn't just go for it without actually running a test to see if they work effectively or not, because some people do find them very, very distracting. Another thing too is, content needs to be scannable. So subheaders are really, really important, especially on mobile, because essentially what a user is trying to do is they're trying to look at a section as they're scrolling and say, okay, I know what this section is about. Yes, I'm interested in reading more about this, or no, I don't. So if you have any kind of level of ambiguity around in your subheader, people are typically going to skip that content, even though there could be really valuable content in there. And so something like Welcome to Evolution, Wellness of Wilmington, NC, that subheader isn't conveying any value to the end user. It's nice to welcome people, but it's not giving them what they're here for. So a better subheader would be something like, 95% of our services are covered by most major insurance companies. So you're immediately ticking off that affordability and insurance piece that they really care about, and they know that that's important content to them in that section. So then they're going to read that section and they're going to engage with that content.
Rich, I noticed in your survey, I think I was scanning it just as you were showing it, and of course everybody will get this to look at it. I think right below insurance, next most important was kind of the breadth of services provided, right? So kind of thinking about the various motivators that you could put here. You could put something like, check out the breadth of services that we have, obviously something maybe a little bit more eloquent. And then maybe instead of get in touch, which they've already had 4 options to do that, it's, read more about the services that we can provide.
Yeah, precisely.
Perfect.
Again, I mentioned this too on the previous slide, but content, especially on mobile, really needs to be scalable. So, and again, I think this is a result of taking a desktop experience and condensing it to mobile. Is that all of a sudden you see that the text that did not look overwhelming on a desktop experience now all of a sudden takes up full screens on mobile. It's not scannable. It's difficult to disseminate. And again, we're going right back to the start of this presentation where we're making users use that second mode of thinking, that analytical mode of thinking that they don't like to do, right? So we want to make it as easy as possible. We want to increase ability. So we should avoid using more than 2 sentences in a paragraph and more than two paragraphs in conjunction. You want to break this text up with iconography, with imagery. You want to be very succinct and concise. So think about the shortest possible way that you can say something. And then, I think the other thing that Lauren, you just touched on is really thinking about that content hierarchy. And so here on their homepage, if we know that affordability and insurance is the most important thing, if we know that testimonials and reputation are incredibly important, and if we know that services and the breadth of care is very important, then those should be in pride place in terms of the user experience. And on this website, it's 12 screen scrolls on my iPhone XS Max, which is obviously a large screen to get down to testimonials, 14 to get down to insurance. And again, even when I got to insurance, it didn't really give me much information, except I know that if I have one of these 4 providers that I'm covered, but what if I have another provider? I don't know. So we need to make sure that we're giving clarity on those things that the user really cares about. And the services section was 6 screen scrolls down. So again, we're making it a little more difficult than perhaps we need to help our users find the right information. Another thing I'll talk about too, when you think about a mobile screen window, right? Especially on these longer form pages, there could be 20 or 30 scrolls. So if you only have your call button at the very top or in your hero or tied right beneath your top nav, you're potentially asking your user to scroll up 20 scrolls to try and get back to that button to then click it to take the action that you want them to take. So what we encourage is for the action to be the sticky element. So if I want a user to call, then make that the sticky element that sticks to either the top or the bottom of the screen. I don't think there's really any empirical evidence that says one is better than the other. You just want it to be as you want it to be the least distracting that it can be. But you want to make it very easy, again, increasing that ability of the users to do the thing that you want them to do. And then we looked at the form, and I think, some little things here. Obviously, no need to repeat the logo. They're already on the site, so they should know what brand it is. That one thing that they do really well in the form is they use an expectation manager here. So they explain what's going to happen once someone submits that form. And that really helps reduce and remove a hurdle that the user might have. And again, this is one of these things that when you talk about it, seems really simple to do. You should tell your user what is going to happen to their information or what's going to happen once they submit their information before they submit their information. And what companies have done in the past is they tell their user that information, but on thank you pages or in a thank you message that pops up after the form submission has happened. And by then it's too late, right? The user doesn't care at that point. They've already submitted their information. So you want to explain to the user up front what you're going to do with their information, what the process looks like, who's going to contact them, etc. One thing, though, that they do have this issue with on the form is that there are I would call some superfluous fields here, which is that you can't see it in the screenshot, but underneath email, the next question is, would you like to be added to our newsletter, right? Which is, if I'm trying to schedule an appointment, I'm probably not thinking about being added to a newsletter. Like, that's something that I can talk to somebody about later, or if I want to come back to the site and subscribe to the newsletter, I can do so. But again, it's a distraction in the moment. We want them to become a client. We want them to schedule an appointment. So let's keep it as concise as possible. And then this form is being used for two different distinct audiences. So patients and referrers. And I would recommend that we split those out, because there are different questions that are required for each, right? And again, you want to make that user experience as simple as possible for your defined audience. So an easy thing to do would be to break those into two separate forms.
So Rich, we talked a little bit about the pop-up. I'm going to get to really our final statement here, which is all of this, everything we've spoken about, the heuristic, analysis, the quantitative and qualitative research, the surveys that need to happen to really even begin to build a CRO roadmap turns into something like this, right? A roadmap whereby we have very clear hypotheses. We have what we think, we use the ICE method, highest impact, lowest effort, to prioritize them. And then you really get in, this is where the retainer is important, right? Because this testing never ends once we start developing these ideas. I want to give you the opportunity, Rich, to have a closing thought. I know we may have lost a few people as we dip into 3 o'clock and people have conflicts, but anything you want to add to just wrap this conversation up, Rich?
Yeah, I think it's your user experience is an incredibly important element of your overarching marketing strategy. And once you have a strong user experience, there are going to be certain elements that you're just unsure of, right? There are best practices, but then there are things that need to be tested. And that's where the benefit of having a CRO program comes in. Not every test that you run is going to be a winner. The average is 1 in 5 tests are a winner, but the better the research is that you do, the higher propensity you'll have to derive winning tests. So if you can be good at doing your research and really figuring out what makes your users tick and identifying weak points, then you should be effective at creating tests that are going to improve your user experience. At 30 to 40% of tests should be winners, and the yield of those tests could be huge. I mentioned the LifeStance test that increased their conversion rate by 30%. And that allowed them to cut back on media spend by a substantial amount, which they could then reinvest into other marketing activities. So it can easily pay for itself over and over again if you guys are willing to invest in this process and in this service.
Awesome. Well, this is going to go out. I know we didn't get a chance. You spoke about this LifeStance test already, Rich. And we fielded some really great questions throughout the conversation, so we really appreciate it. If you have additional questions that we didn't get to today, something pops into your head that you think about afterwards, or maybe you decide to go take a look at your mobile experience and you see some of the issues that Rich just pointed out on the Evolution site, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to go through this in a one-to-one capacity with you. So thank you all so much, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, Rich.
Thank you.